Hey, this is Nathan Hall. He's going to be giving us a talk on auth with Istio and Envoy. Take it away.
That's my first slide. I don't know what to say now.
Stole your thunder.
So my name's Nathan, and this talk is about authentication and authorization with your service mesh, utilizing a service mesh to protect your services, or as Sean Connery says, don't mess with my services. I've worked on that an embarrassingly long time to both come up with that tagline and also to work on my Sean Connery impersonation. So you're welcome. About me, I'm a principal software engineer at Clearco, and to talk about Clearco a little bit, we do non-dilutive equity financing for your startups. So anywhere from $10,000 to $20 million. And non-dilutive equity means, you know, in the past, if you wanted to go raise money, you'd have to say, VC, here is 50% of my company for $10. Or you go to the bank and you say, I will take $50,000, and if I do not succeed, they will take your house and your firstborn child. So we don't do either of those things. We take a percentage of revenue, so if you win, we win. The other cool thing is it's all data-based, not database. And so, you know, if you look at standard VC funding, you know, the average for minorities and women is probably less than 5%, and we do 25 times that. So if you want to talk more about that or interested in hearing more about working there, let me know. I actually live here. I moved back about 2 years ago. I do not have the Tweeter, but I have LinkedIn, and that's my GitHub. Dominathan is actually a Twitter, or my old gaming handle, and has nothing to do with the BDSM fetish. So, about this presentation. Who here uses Kubernetes at their company, or raise your hand? So about 50. And then if you use Kubernetes, who here uses a service mesh as part of it? Okay, a couple more. So what this talk is about, it's about using a service mesh for auth, but it's also a little more than that. I'm going to talk about what you can get from using a service mesh, and then a little bit about the auth problem, and then lastly, we're going to do a live demo. I'm currently 4 for 4 on live demos, which means that I have failed on all 4 of them. So let's try to keep that going. So let's talk about the problem. Auth is hard. Authentication, you know, I mean, the Keycloak people made it look easy, but it is not. And authorization is even harder than authentication. And so what I've seen as the companies I've been at, for some reason, I'm a glutton for pain, and I like to go work at startups where they work you to death sometimes, and then you keep growing, but people start to roll their own. So it goes a little like this. So you got your first 5 customers, they're paying you. You maybe got 3 or 4 people working on it. You got a monolith. Your front ends and your back end are all on the same deployment infrastructure. It's great. Everything's happy. That's the happy path. Then you go out and you raise a little money, and as you can tell by my slides, I suck at user experience and CSS. So we go hire a front-end person, and the front-end person says, hey, why don't we split this apart? You know, you can still handle the auth, but I'll, you know, have a separate deployment and things will be nice. And I say, that sounds great. Let's do that. So that goes for a while. That goes great. And then phase 3 rolls around, and all of a sudden you got your first bottleneck. You know, I don't know, there's some nightly cron job that's got hundreds of millions of rows pulling in, and it's breaking everything. So somebody says, hey, let's pull that out into a queue, and you know, we'll make it so you don't have to have a bottleneck in the service. And you say, that makes sense. I mean, we auth with RabbitMQ on one side, and service 1 can do it, and I think that'll work. Let's try that. So, you know, then, you know, more bottlenecks, more queues, that's fine. And then you hire Joe, and Joe says, he prefaces all his PR reviews with, I've worked at scale before. So you know he's smart. And so he says, why don't we break out this service as a microservice? Well, I'm not going to use a separate database because you already have one, and you also have the auth in your service. So I'm just going to have the front end talk to my service, but I'm also going to use your service to store all my data and to handle the auth. And so you're like, well, he's worked at scale, so And then he says, why don't we break up, you like microservices, well, let's try micro front ends. But we're going to have a shared auth library at the front end, and actually it's going to have to be deployed before all the other micro front ends can go out, because that makes sense. And he breaks out another service. And then you end up with, well, of course, Kubernetes, because Google uses it, so somebody added that in there. And then you end up with something like this. So you've created the proverbial ball of mud. There's all the application developers trying to, move the ball of mud forward. Meanwhile, your director's in that white shirt trying to figure out what's gone wrong. And your CEO's in the back trying to sell some new feature you've never heard of to some new partners. And the whole time, your user's just sitting there, it's like, where's my tweet? That's all I wanted. And if we go back and look at this for a second, like, there's a lot of problems. But one of the problems is every single one of these services has tried to bake auth into their service by themselves without really talking about how we can have a centralized configuration as code to handle it for us. So that is where the service mesh can come in. Service mesh does a lot of things. When you think about it from a high-level architectural pattern, there's really only two pieces of it that you need to know. The first is the proxy. The proxy or the sidecar or the middleware, some people call it. But basically, if you think about it from Kubernetes perspective, it is inside your pod. It is another container that intercepts all your traffic. And it can either just do nothing, forward it on, or it can do cool things like rate limiting, throttling, quota management, caching, retry, circuit breakers. There's a lot of things that it can do, but it can also handle authentication and authorization. And that is also handled by the control plane. The control plane is where you tell Istio and Kubernetes, like, these are my new custom resource definitions that I'm going to give you, and you make sure that if they match my selectors, that you handle that for me. And so that's what we're going to talk about with Istio and Envoy on this talk. And so these two policies right here are actually all you need to do authentication and authorization. I'm also going to bake in, depending on time, mutual TLS because I can. And this is going to be the live demo. So if you go to the Istio Envoy demonstration sample site, this is what they have you download. And what it is a simple website that's called Book Info. And Book Info has a product page that is a Python app that talks to two different backends that also talks to another backend. One is in Java that is the reviews, so people know what the book's rated. There's the Ruby backend that tells you what the details are, and then there's a Node.js backend that tells you what the ratings are. And so what we are going to do is first institute, zero trust, least privilege. There's a meme that I've always loved that I tried to find, but I can't, that is your VP of security comes in and says, we're going to introduce zero trust. And then somebody says, oh, that's kind of like least privilege. And then the security expert says, why are you asking? I'll work on that. The meme's better. But anyway, we're going to do MTLS authentication authorization and roll it all into one. So let's look at our beautiful app first. So this is it. This is our Book Info app. And so I'm running Docker Desktop local to have this all spun up, but it's pretty. And our boss has come to us and said, hey, we need to institute the three things that I just talked about, but also we need to bake out the rating service so that people can start just buying the ratings from us, because that's going to make us a lot of money. And you're like, okay, great, let's do it. So the first thing we're going to talk about is mutual TLS. And so why is mutual TLS important? So in the old days, when you had everything on-prem and it was self-hosted, you could trust the network. But that kind of flies out the window when you no longer control what's happening. And so, you have a disgruntled Amazon employee and he goes in and throws Wireshark on and starts sifting your traffic. Or you tell your partners that, hey, everything is encrypted at rest, and also in transit. Might not necessarily be true if you are not managing the certificates yourself or haven't set them up. And so as an example, what I'm going to do is everything's on the default namespace. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and let's pretend I'm a hacker. And I figured out that I can get into Nathan's Kubernetes cluster and I can start sniffing traffic. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that's big enough. I'm going to get this, maybe it's like getting, I don't know, I just did a post request and I just did $500 to my bank account and I figured out what the password was or something. So I'm not going to throw Wireshark on this, but you get the general idea. What Istio and Envoy allow you to do is say, let's create a, I'll make sure that's big enough too. Let's create mutual TLS across the board for our entire, for all our pods that are running. And the way that we do that is we just do two things. One is we create this peer authentication policy that says, hey, if you are talking over TCP, gRPC, HTTP, we are going to enforce that it's HTTPS. That's the only thing we're going to allow. And the other thing that we're going to say is if you make a call in the network, and that's what this is saying, anything in the default namespace. If you make a call in the network, you're going to let Istio handle the TLS upgrade. So if I do an HTTP call from a pod that is managed by Istio, it will upgrade the communication to HTTPS, and I don't have to worry about anything, which is pretty nice considering I don't want to go through the difficulty of managing certificates myself. And so if we go and apply that, I don't know what I did, that policy, I think I said Nathan, MTLS policy, and my two policies were created, and if I try to curl this again, it will say it was reset by peer. You can get more cryptic errors if you try to go in and set everything you want. But so that's good, but we can also see that I have another pod that I've created that is in the default namespace where I've set the Istio mutual stuff. And if I go in there and use this one, you will notice that I can run the same command and it won't fail. And that is because Istio is handling the upgrade to the HTTPS for me. So if I run it, and boom, I get it back. So that's pretty cool. So these are some of the things that you get with Istio. I won't say out of the box, but you can add pretty easily. A couple other things to talk about. If you already have Kubernetes running and you have a bunch of pods running, you probably don't want to use strict. You probably want to use something like permissive, which says, hey, I will do both HTTP and HTTPS, but if you can upgrade it to HTTPS, do that while I upgrade all my services to be able to use HTTPS. So I think that's pretty cool, but that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about authentication and authorization. So going back to our beautiful website, your boss has come in and said, I want you to make this rating service something that we can make millions of dollars off of. And you say, all right, how are we going to do that? Well, the first thing is we need to make it so that only paying customers can access our rating service. So I shouldn't be able to go in and say, oops. I shouldn't be able to go in and say, curl ratings. I should at least have to say some sort of, give me a header that's an authorization token that I've given to my paying client. And so that's what we're going, that's what we're going to do. So I saw earlier there's a great talk on Keycloak, and so I said, why don't we use Keycloak as the proof of concept? You can do this with any sort of IdP that you want. I've done it with, we use Okta at my company. I don't know why. Workforce employee stuff, but auth0 works, Cognito works great. Doesn't really matter. The only things that you have to have are a token endpoint where you can generate the token and a JSON Web Key Set URI where you can get the public key information. And so Keycloak does that for you, and so I've gone ahead and I've created my my realm, DevOps days bham, and I've created my client and my client secret. So if I look at the, my password is admin, just in case anybody wants to play along. I use that for most things. So if I go look at, there is my client ID name, and then I also had my client secret that I had earlier. And so what we want to do is tell Istio to only allow requests that are coming in to this endpoint from this, from the Keycloak authorizes. That's my authorization server. And so let's go look at what that would look like. The first thing is we have to do a request authentication policy. The request authentication policy is saying in the default namespace for any app that matches these selector labels of ratings, I want you to do two things. First, I want you to only allow tokens that come in that have an issuer as part of the decoded token that match this. And the other thing that I want you to do is use the JSON web key set URI as this. And so this is going to look a little weird. I'm going to tell you why in a second. I couldn't figure out how to get Kubernetes to run with this thing in the last hour, so I have it running on Docker, and I am forwarding the my port using ngrok. So that's what we're going to do really quickly. So this is my beautiful URL, HTTPS. Anybody in here wants to copy that and go play around, you can, but you know my password, so please don't break this presentation, because I'm 4 for 4. So let's add that to our URI. That looks pretty good. And let's, okay, let's try it out. So first thing I'm going to do is we're going to apply this policy to our cluster. So let's see, what was it? Samples. Nathan. We have our Keycloak one. And so it was created. So now if I go back and I run my curl command to this endpoint and I try it out, notice that I now get a new error. It says it's a bad token's malformed, whatever. So let's go get a token that we know is not the correct token. So I went to jwt.io to do this, and this token is not going to work on my app because it doesn't match the criteria that I told it it needed to match. And so you say doesn't match the KID or the algorithm from the JWT that is expected from your JSON web key set. But you will also notice that if I just don't pass one in, so if I say ratings 100, I still get data back. Why is that? Well, that's because all this policy has done is say, if you get a JWT, this is what it must conform to. It doesn't say you have to use it. And that is where we get into authorization policies. So this is the meat and the potatoes of what Istio provides. So the first thing that we have to do is allow our own application to be able to talk to the ratings. So if we go back and we look at our this guy, notice that the reviews app is the only thing that actually needs to talk to ratings. And so if we think about that from a principle of least privilege, we're basically saying we don't want anything else in our cluster to be able to talk to the ratings. So if I busted in as a hacker into the Python app, I shouldn't be able to talk to the ratings because it doesn't need to know what's going on with ratings. And so if we apply just that piece, and I do it, that's not the right one. We are in book info, and we're going to use the Keycloak. And it's created. If we do just that, then the only thing that is allowed to talk to our app is our reviews service. And you can see that it's still populating. But that doesn't help us at all from the standpoint of our newly generated access token. But what it does is it blocks external people from being able to talk to it. So the last step in the equation is adding the ability for our newly found client to utilize our I don't know what it did. Oh, there it is. To utilize our service. And so if we go in and uncomment this out, what I'm saying is if you get a token that got passed in from the policy we just created and the issuer matches this, then I'm going to allow them to do any sort of get operations on the ratings section, on the ratings path, but nothing else. And there's a bunch of different things that you can pick, methods, paths. You can pull some out from a database attached to the token and do some other more complicated authorization policies, but this is kind of the simplest one. And so let's reapply our policy. And so it's reconfigured. Let's generate a token from Keycloak. I might have to go back a little bit. And let's copy the token into our request. And let's run it one more time. So I say this authorization token, and close that off. And it works. Well, it was working. There we go. And then the last piece, and this is just more for adding more scope. So let's say you've got 5 or 10 different clients and you want them to have different access points depending on what's inside their token. So if we go and we take that token we just copied and we look at it, every single one of these keys is what comes in as a claim from Istio. And so when we add the final key of the YAML file, you can say anything that comes in with this client ID that matches DevOps days BHAM. So if I go back and I look at this, there it is, client ID DevOps days BHAM, then I will allow it to go forth. And you can say more complicated things like they can also access the routes like if I had another route that was health or something like that, then it could also do stuff like that. So we utilize this quite a bit at my company, and it's been a godsend for having a single spot for your configuration for all your different authorization policies. I can't say enough about Istio and Envoy. I hope this kind of gives you a glimpse into what they are capable of doing, and let me end it with some questions.
Questions? Oh, coming over here.
Thank you. So what environments can you guys connect to, just besides your Kubernetes cluster? So cloud space, databases, like what all can you guys connect to?
Using Istio and Envoy? We don't, so all our, for the most of the stuff that we build is what we use Istio and Envoy on top of. You can, if you want to host your own Postgres in its own pod, you can put Istio and Envoy in front of it. We tried that for a while with our Prometheus pods, but and our Mongo pod and our what do we use it on? We used it for caching for a while, but it makes things a little more complicated. So for the most part, for us, we only use it for our services that we control, and we pass everything else off.
Okay, so just from a company standpoint, and you guys only authorize for your customers, correct? Your
So-
zero trust for your customers, correct?
And internally.
And internally,
So
okay.
That's the other piece that, if you look at the two different froms here,
Okay,
the first one from this source is
Okay.
saying anything inside the cluster, the default namespace that has a service account that matches the book info reviews, allow them to do any sort of get operation. So that's the other powerful piece of it is you're saying anything with a service account in Kubernetes, you can say, I will allow it to do blah on these services. So that's actually primarily what we use it for, in addition to external customers.
okay, thank you. And are you guys just focusing on your IT team and your DevOps team, or as a company as a whole?
Company as a whole.
Cool, okay.
Anybody else? Oh. Probably should have more people doing this, but. That's right. Oh, thank you, bud.
So we do similar, not quite at the scale you do. Have you ever seen an issue where the JWKS being synced from a remote Envoy seems to sometimes have like a delay in syncing when the JWKS gets rotated? Have you ever seen that problem before?
So we use GKE.
Yeah.
But not really. I mean, if I'm understanding the question, you're saying like how long it takes or something like that. You're saying when you make a change to something on one of your Istio CRDs, like how long it takes to propagate?
No, I mean like if you rotate the cert on the issuer, you're going to get a new JWKS profile from the remote issuer, and then Envoy has to import that. We've getting delays on that.
I haven't seen that personally, and like I'm just looking at it from, you know, as an example right here.
Yeah.
I made a lot more than one request, but it does the, you know, it does the check on the, you know, on its own. Like I'm sure there's a setting that your trigger you can make it update, but I personally haven't seen that happen now.
Adam, to run that. That's good.
Sorry. Hey, so I have a question. We are working on building out our clusters, and one of the other service meshes we're interested in is Linkerd. And I was wondering if you have any experience with that and sort of comparing it to Envoy and Istio.
Yeah, so I'll preface this by saying no, I do not, and I've done limited research on Linkerd. I do not think that there's a wide difference in what they offer. I don't think you can go wrong by picking either. It's probably not a great answer, but I just haven't used it. Because when I got here, we were already using Istio and Envoy.
Right. Questions? All right, can we have a big clap for Nathan? Thank you so much. That was an excellent talk.